want to thank everyone for coming today to my mother's memorial on Tari. And I'm here to just celebrate the life of my mother, Judith Roche. She told me that song was about the Elysian fields, and I'm sure she's cavorting there now. I think we will start with the eulogy, and my daughter, Sahara Suval, Judith's granddaughter, is going to give that.
Thank you, everyone, for gathering here today to celebrate an extraordinary woman. We are deeply touched by all the folks that are here, the wonderful folks at Hugo House that have put this on. I also want to give a special mention to Sybil, James, as well as just all the different friends and family who really made today come together. So thank you all. I know that Judd would have been just as moved by the love outpouring for her today. And as we all know, Judd was never one to turn down a party. For those of you who came to the Jack Straw Memorial, this is kind of the same show. I am kind of a one-trick pony, but I'm going to do my best. So I would appreciate it if you laugh at my jokes again, even if you've heard them. But as my mom said, my name is Sahara. I am Judd's firstborn granddaughter, born to her daughter Tari, and I'm honored to be able to share some of my grandmother's story with you. Judith Louise Nault was born September 9th, 1941 to Aline and Lawrence Nault. She was the oldest of 3 sisters. Her family lived in Detroit, where Judith graduated from high school in 1959. While growing up, both of Judd's parents were in the union movement, which is likely where some of her fiery spirit was stocked, lit, and tended. Her mother, Aline, was heavily active in the union, serving as the vice president on the union while working at the Hudson Motor Company. There are stories of Aline's moxie while working with the union, including the time that she allegedly smuggled a stink bomb into the company store of an anti-union organization who was hiring scab workers there to break up a strike. The Nault dinner table was no stranger to political discourse, often holding discussion about union ongoings, workers' rights, and local politics, something that would leave an indelible mark on Judd for the remainder of her lifetime. Judd's family remained close growing up, spending summer vacations in upstate Michigan, where she learned to water ski at a family cabin, road trips in California, a visit to see relatives in Oklahoma. These were fond memories shared by Judith and her 2 sisters. Judd remained close with her sisters throughout her entire life, spending many summers traveling to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan where they lived. Both Marilyn and Lori were by Judd's side as she passed, along with my mother, who held vigil for nearly 3 weeks. Her sister Lori is actually here today. While Judith is survived by her 2 sisters, her father Lawrence would go on to pass suddenly when she was 21, and Aline would go on to pass when Judd was in her 50s. Judith met Thomas McCutcheon, or Mick Roche, when she was 15 and he was 21 at a dance. They dated through the rest of high school and were married December 18th, 1960. They first lived in Ypsilanti, Michigan, where Mick was a student at Eastern State University. Their daughter, my mother, was born in 1961. While there, Judith fell in love with the written word and the study of literature and drama, graduating in January 1967 with a Bachelor's of Science. Many years later, she would go on to graduate with a master's degree in poetics in 1986. In 1967, the family moved to Washington State, where Judith got a job at Anacortes High School as an English teacher. She taught in Anacortes from 1967 to 1970. In 1970, Judith and Mick's second child, a son, Robin, was born. In those days, it was difficult to obtain a diagnosis for a child with a developmental disability. It took over 2 months and several trips to Children's Hospital in Seattle to confirm Robin's diagnosis of Down syndrome, something we like to think of as a gift in our family. But once informed of this diagnosis, the family had to make a difficult decision. Would the family choose to keep Robin and try and find supports for him, or would they turn him over to the state to be institutionalized, as was a common practice for many families during this time? Resolved and fiery, Grandma Judd was never one to back down from a challenge. The family embraced their newest member wholeheartedly, though not without some difficulty. Schools at that time were not required to provide resources for children with special needs, and most rural schools, like in Anacortes, where the family lived, simply did not have them available. It was also during this time that Judith and Mick separated and ultimately divorced. Unable to teach full-time nor access proper resources for Robin, Judith decided to move with the children down to Seattle in 1973, thus the beginning of a long era. At first, things were tough for the small family, with Judith finding part-time work as a substitute teacher. In 1974, Judd met somebody new, a New Yorker who had found himself in Alaska. They fell in love, and she decided to follow him to Alaska for a temporary placement in a union working on the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. She left her children in 6 months during that time. It was exciting and hard, and I think one of her greatest adventures. Her stories from her time in Alaska include close calls with grizzlies, getting caught on the pipeline by her hair on accident, and of a deep, bitter, dangerous cold. Grandma also kept an old grizzly paw from this time. It was reportedly hacked off by her old lover. I don't know all the details, I just know she had the paw. And she kept it on her bedside for the rest of her life. I do have to say, though, with age and kind of the prying young fingers of grandchildren, the paw is painfully delicate and now lives in a box. After her contract was up in Alaska, Judith returned to Seattle, single, and used her earnings to purchase a purple house with a green door for her and her children. This house, at 178 Lake Dell, would be where she would spend the next 43 years of her life. Around this time, she met what was to become the foundation of a formidable band of women and friends, Patricia Berry, Sybil James, and Karen DeWinter, who remained dear and close friends all the way through the end of their lives, with Pat preceding Judith in death in 2018. Judd's band of wild women would eventually grow to include Rosemary, Linda, Stacy, Sandra, and even another Judith. My grandmother loved deeply. She loved art and magic and food and wine and people. She loved traditions and all holidays, pagan, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, it didn't really matter. She loved them all, the ceremony of it, the reverence, and any opportunity to dress up. She loved animals and the natural world, and she worked hard to bridge communities to nature through her art. She loved to teach, and she was good at it. She taught for over 40 years in a variety of places, including schools, colleges, prisons, community centers, and in this lovely institution that we're on today. Judd was vivacious and fun. I remember living with her for a few months in 2014, and she would always have a busier social schedule than me. I would come home at 10 p.m. and she'd come in at 11:30. She was a city girl, and she loved Seattle and all that it had to offer. As we all know, Judith flung herself into arts and in the poetry scene here in the city, just as she had with the rest of her life. I had always known that she was an accomplished artist, but I don't think I truly understood the impact that my grandmother had had on Seattle's poetry community until she passed last November. From her years working as the literary arts director for Bumbershoot and her work teaching poetry, she published a huge array of poetry, including 4 books, and edited many more. In fact, today, someone actually gave my mom a book that has one of her poems that was just hot off the press. So her work really does endure. One of her books even received an American Book Award in 2007. And while her art medium was paper and ink, some of my most favorite works of hers are the large, permanent collaborative installations she did across King County. like the blessings for the water and the biosolids she did for the Brightwater Treatment Center in Woodinville, her poems on a bus, and her salmon sweet poems that play at the touch of a button at the Ballard Locks. When she passed, and I watched memories and poems and videos and articles and photos of her pour in, I think I finally began to understand how special my grandmother really was and how many people's lives she truly touched. This is where you get to laugh at my joke the second time. Shortly after my grandmother passed, I started writing down my memories of her in preparation for this eulogy. And when I went to turn my notes into prose, I realized, holy shit, I've written a poem. And I think that I would be remiss not to share it with you. So this is Judith. Grandma, whimsical, believes in magic, purveyor of plants, encouraged self-expression, grand communicator, the author, the poet, the advocate, for Robin and the oppressed, Vietnam to WTO to multiple women's marches, a second wave feminist. She was always a fighter, even to the end. She loved parties and hosting in her purple house overlooking her magnificent garden. Her annual New Year's Day party, a tradition older than I, used to be legendary, or so I'm told. I will miss her black-eyed peas, which are supposed to bring good fortune in the new year. And from what I see now, and truly have gotten to see over the past few months, my grandmother was a good friend. I know that death and the afterlife aren't polite topics of conversation, but I want to take a moment to talk about Judith. Not so much the passing, we all know what happened in the end, but rather the profound and beautiful love that we got to see and witness throughout the process of her passing. Judd suffered a stroke about 2 weeks before she passed. It was sudden and devastating. We knew within a few days that her options were going to be limited. It was decided that she would come home and spend her final days in her beautiful purple house overlooking Lake Washington. And in that time, her friends and family poured in from around the country. People brought food, flowers, blankets, memories, and their time. We read stories, recited poems, sang, prayed, laughed, cried, reminisced, and loved. It was raw and real and achingly human. Throughout this, Judd would drift in and out of consciousness, but she was mostly with us until the final few days. She listened and did her best to communicate when the pain wasn't too much. All through this, her faithful feline companion, Pierre, would lie on her bed, reassuringly kneading her legs through the handmade quilt that came from Michigan, from a cousin. She passed peacefully and was surrounded by so much light and love. I'm told you could almost see the glow of that love lighting the way for her on her journey to the stars. It's been over 2 months now, and I still feel her presence, and I miss her every day. And while I miss her a lot, I actually don't worry about her or where she's gone on to, because you see, she's actually told us where she could find her. Her work lives on in so many ways. So with that, I'd like to close this with her words. So this is Heaven by Judith Roche from her book, All Fire, All Water. When I arrive there, after a brief but mortal illness, I will ask my mother which great-great-grandma, picking spring flowers, choked a bear with her own fist shoved down his throat. And could it be true? And for her recipe for turkey stuffing, I'll be weeping just to see her again. I'll tell her what I did with the rest of my life, that my later poems didn't have so much sex, so she could have shown them to her friends without being embarrassed. I'll let her know how the seeds of her stories about Arthur and Guinevere, Abelard and Heloise, flamed at the heart of the troubadour, and that one of my children grew up strong, though troubled by the grief of life and her very complexity, and the other grew to become a rare, happy man through his own complications. And how bitter it became I couldn't ease their passage through the world. She'll remember that as the bitter way of it. How salmon and wolves opened up in me, and she'll understand with her own wild heart. I'll tell her none of my marriages worked out, except for the children, and that my sisters and I still seek our misplaced childhood in each other, in spite of how bossy I could be as the first child. I'll tell her now that I understand what she meant those many childhood nights when I couldn't sleep and she told me, "It's all right, you are resting your heart." I'll want to know if birds live there, and she'll name me their flaming colors. And I am playing the piano again, haltingly at first, but I am getting it back. That will make her happy. The world, I'll say, is still broken. Ignorant armies clash by night and day with less reason than the ones that you knew. And she'll just nod as though it's no longer her concern, and perhaps it isn't. I will tell her we are orphans in the presence of her absence. And she will tell me again the story of the girl with flowers in her hands, the pomegranate seeds, and the underground. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to invite a very special person up to say a few more words, and that would be my sister, Gabriella Suval, who is Judd's second granddaughter.
Hello, I'm actually the loud grandchild, so this is weird for me to use a microphone because you all would be able to hear me without it, but hello, my name's Gabby, I'm the second grandchild. I want to thank everyone for being here today. Judith was a remarkable person, and this room shows it. I'm going to refer to Judith as Grandma Judd, because that's what she is to me, and that's what she'll always be to me. Grandma Judd is known for many things, specifically being a literary goddess. I, however, know my grandma as something different, a chef. I grew up many a weekends spending time at my grandma's house with her, especially when I was younger. My mom was a single working parent. Grandma Judd and I used to have tons of adventures in the Purple House above the lake. Many a walks, shopping trips, and tons of Pike Place Market adventures, which I'd beg her to do every single time I came, and she would always indulge me, even though she probably had been there a million times. My grandma was a passionate person, especially about good food. We used to make all sorts of things together. We spent many a family holidays together, cooking, and I would be her small shadow in the kitchen. I remember one Thanksgiving in particular. I had to be about 12. I stayed at her house for the weekend. We woke up really early to put the turkey in the oven. She taught me how to cook an entire Thanksgiving meal, down to making homemade turkey place settings for every dinner guest that we had. I remember telling her how much I loved cooking, how much I loved the process of setting up a meal and pleasing people. And she told me, "You know, you could do this as a job, right? You could go to culinary school." And it was at that moment that I was 12 years old that I knew I was doing with the rest of my life. Over the years, I would call her with many cooking questions. After I finished high school, I immediately went to culinary school. About a year into school, the calls changed, and my grandma started calling me, asking me for questions. Every day I wake up, I go to work, I think of my grandma and how her passion of cooking brought me here today, sharing my story with you all. I was lucky enough to inherit my grandma's recipe books. And I'm talking about the old books that have the handwritten cards and handwritten recipes, tons from my great-great-grandma. While looking through it about a month ago, I was lucky enough to come across a recipe that I recognized. It was one of my own. I didn't realize that I had come up with a recipe that my grandma was proud enough that she put in her book, in her box. And It was at that moment I was truly honored and proud to be her grandchild. Today, I will read a poem for you to honor the literary goddess herself. It took me the longest time to decide what I'd read with you, but I chose Metaphors to Start Us, which is also from the All Fire, All Water book. Metaphors of dust. As it turns out, we are actually stardust. I thought it was a metaphor of life and space and time. Apparently, our materials are 13 million years old. We are star stuff, pondering the story told in life with stars. Our ancestors include imploded stars. They are with us now, our dust. But we continue the story as additions, epilogues, a metaphor for all that's been in this old galaxy. The gravity of time. Big balls of burning light in time, says the website of stars. How many million years old? And we are made of all that dust. I can hardly tell what is not metaphor, and literally, the story behind the story. We are stardust, pondering our own story. We are spirit and story, and caught in time of existence and metaphor. For what? That we, stars, and like stars, will become dust when we die old? But it's so old, this grand, often told story, that we are dust and return to dust. We are an instance of star and story, of rocks, glaciers, carbon-based creatures, stars. We become the metaphor. And in this metaphor, we are all old souls, stuff of ancient stars, singing our story and whatever it says, and about our mixture of spirit and dust. We are the metaphor for the story, old souls swirling in the wind, tunnel of time, spirit and star and dust. Thank you all.
I want to invite you all to pray with me, but I want to encourage you to pray to whoever comforts you. So if that's Jesus, Yahweh, Allah, the Great Spirit, or the Goddess, pray to that one. Lord, I want to thank you for all the people who have come together today to honor my mother's memory. Family, especially Sahara and Gabriella, and their partners, Ronnie and Mason and Dave, and Lori and Bruce, my mom's sister and brother-in-law who are with us, and Marilyn and George, my mom's other sister and brother-in-law who are not with us today, and all of my cousins who came to be with us while we were caring for her at the end and helped to ease her passing for her and also for me and for my children. They helped to care for her, helped to take me for walks every day to help me de-stress. They were wonderful. Also, I want to thank all of my mom's friends. They were wonderful and also helped her to ease her passing and let her feel love as she was going through that process. I especially want to thank Karen for helping to find special places for a lot of my mom's artwork, where it will be recognized for what it is and appreciated. And also for Sybil, who has sponsored this event for my mother, which was extremely helpful to the family. Also the Literary Arts Community of Seattle, which gave my mom great pleasure, work, entertainment, and all of the people from that community that are here today. Also want to thank her exercise group and various poetry groups and neighbors and people that helped us also to ease her passing and to make her feel loved in the process. Lord, I want to thank you also for all of my mother's extraordinary gifts. She was an amazing teacher, writer, environmentalist, and visionary. She left an incredible mark on her world. Many of the students she taught are now writers, artists, social activists, teachers, environmentalists, and healers such as myself. She imparted to each of us communication skills and the vision to use these skills to influence a larger world, a world greater than ourselves. I want to thank you, Lord, for our beautiful, natural, wild world that you have given unto our care. I acknowledge that there is trouble in paradise of this world, and some of us have become too ambitious and too greedy. We are killing our forests, poisoning our oceans and rivers, causing our glaciers to melt and destroying this wonderful planet that you have given us and our fellow creatures to call home. We are making ourselves sick. I pray that you would use the gifts of my mother and her students and people like her to inspire and educate our species to have the wisdom to divert the dangerous path that we are on, to heal the forests and allow them to grow again, to get control of our carbon footprint and slow the course of global warming, to open and clean our rivers and lakes and oceans to our salmon and other creatures who depend on the water of life, which is all of us. To stop the poisoning of our food sources so that we can feed our people well and in humane, non-carcinogenic ways. To manage our wastes in ways that are sustainable and non-toxic. And generally, Lord, I want to acknowledge and appreciate your gracious gifts to us and ask that we learn from people with vision, such as my mother, to be better stewards of what you have bestowed upon us in a way that is befitting of such a gift and is sustainable. So Lord, thank you for my mother and other visionaries among us who teach us to love and revere and respect the gifts you have given us and what is sacred. My mother was flawed as a human, but did possess the iconic values of an earth mother or goddess. I pray that you take her home, heal her, restore her to her youthful, beautiful, healthy self. Take away all of her pain and suffering, the disappointments of her human life. Adorn her in roses, give her divine wine to drink. Let her enjoy her eternity with my grandparents, especially Grandma, and with all the old great poets she will meet up there. And let her know that she was well loved by many. Amen.
Amen.
And now we are going to have my best friend Annie lead us in Amazing Grace. And in case anyone forgot the later verses, we
The
have,
third verse, it always
yeah,
says.
a prayer.
So everybody just raise your voices in song. You know that that's what Judith would just love. Song is, of course, celebration, and here we're celebrating her life. So sing it out. Sing it strong, guys, okay?
Yeah, we can stand.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but
request, Michael Haro is going to sing part of the Internationale. Revolutionary song.
Assalamu alaikum. I want to begin by extending an apology to the room because Christopher and I were unable to work out any kind of rehearsal schedule. We had originally planned to do this as a duet. For a long time, I realized we were working up to this point, and I felt bad about it, but then I had to remember that if there was any one thing, because what prevented this from happening was I had to grab whatever work I could get. And I know that if there was any one thing that used to drive Judd absolutely apeshit about me, it was my inability to take on labor discipline and hold down a job and do the right thing when she was letting me live in the basement of her house on Lake Dell Street, which she did for 2 years. Because the woman was forever opening doors. That was what she did. She was like a trickster figure in our lives. And I mean that in the best sense of the word. She, as quiet as it's kept, Judd labored enormously to bring a number of Pan-African poetic figures through here. People like Jane Cortez and Amiri Baraka and Sonia Sanchez, a lot of poets that might not have ever seen an audience in this town, but did because of her very hard work as poetry, literary, and arts director at Bumbershoot for all those years. In addition to that, she was forever opening doors to younger artists of color and making sure that we had work and residencies and et cetera and so forth. That was what she did. She opened a lot of doors. It was extremely difficult to see her go as she did, not only because it happened so suddenly. I mean, we knew she was ailing, but it happened quite fast when it happened. But also, in terms of the international, she left the world at a time when the international revolutionary current is beginning to pick up steam in so many places in the world, including in this country, where we see masses of people supporting an insurgent candidacy that is making the people that own this country pretty nervous. Which is interesting because all that's up to question here is a Keynesian position that would have been quite mainstream and quite normal in the years we were growing up. But this world is full of absurdity, and we're writers and we're artists and we're musicians and we're thinkers, and absurdity belongs to us. And the international survives and it endures, and it survives and endures largely because of the belief in that cross-section, that crossroads that Judd walked between the world of revolution and the world of mysticism and magic realism, which was always who she was and why we hold her to our hearts as closely as we do. An amazing, amazing presence. Kind of like I'm reminded of something that somebody said at the time of Lennon's death, that when a large rock rolls down into a body of water, you see the ripples fanning out outwardly for a long time after, it's moved down into the surf. And the ripples are radiating outward all these months after her passing. So, in light of all that, I'm just going to do the second verse of the International, which goes, "We want no condescending saviors to judge us from their judgment seat, nor ask we now for heavenly favors. What we ask is life complete, to make the thief disgorge his booty, to free the convict from her cell. We can decide to do our duty. We can decide and do it well. Then, comrades, come rally. Let each worker heed the call. The Internationale can unify us all. 'Tis the final conflict. Let each worker take their place. The Internationale will free the human race. Solidarity. I've been asked to tell you that we're not going to do an intermission here. We're going to go ahead and move on through, just like the lightning always does. Roll on through and do what we have. And in the realm of lightning and words that, words that light fire up in the sky, there are very few people who do it as well as Annabelle does. She's our first person that'll lead off on these people time interview.
Speak of fire, Michael, I have to say that as far as my friendship with Judith, it really began with the spark of fire in terms of resistance and standing up to hate and fighting for a better world. That was kind of the seed. And that happened right after 9/11, when the sort of beginning of Islamophobia really started cranking up big time. And I helped to organize a reading of different writers from the Central and Middle East, so that their voices could be heard themselves in the midst of all this. So poets and artists. And Judith was one of the readers for that event. It was a big deal at Elliott Bay. A lot of people came. And that was really the beginning of my relationship as a friendship, not just someone I knew and liked in the scene. But what's interesting is shortly after that, she invited me that next year at Bumbershoot. She did a panel discussion around the role of the artist in face of, hate and what was going on in relationship to the Middle East in particular, what this country was up to, and asked me to be the, what do you call that person? The moderator, thanks. But the other thread that really connected us, and you could see it, is the other end of the spectrum, and it was motherhood. But I think one of the things that's hopeful right now in the world is that you've got that sort of like somehow to be an activist means that women, sort of their roles as bearing children and taking care of homes and generally caretaking is sort of an insignificant role. And that therefore women are always sort of in the back seat of the revolution. That was something that was still going on back in the 60s. But right now that idea is kind of being blasted out of the water more than any time, definitely in my lifetime. And I think Judith would have loved as much as I did this movement. Remember all the stuff that's going on in India right now with the citizenship, question of who can have citizenship and who can't. And all these women, Indian women who came out of their kitchens in their homes and sat down for weeks and weeks and weeks with their kids, doing the caretaking and declaring caretaking and motherhood as a revolutionary act or an act of resistance. So I just wanted to say that because I felt all that in Judith, and she would have celebrated that. But right now what I want to do is celebrate Judith's latest publication, which was mentioned earlier. And this anthology, which is called Take a Stand, Art Against Hate, is just coming out now. It will be in bookstores real soon. It's available on the Raven Chronicles website and Amazon right now. But Judith is in it. And I so love the fact that she's in it and wish she could have seen the book, because I know she would, not just being in it, but who she's in it with, And we've got writers in here who are literally still in high school, or one person who's in my class at Recovery Cafe, Safe Place Writing Circle, who've been homeless for 6.5 years and started coming to the writing circle, and she has a piece in this anthology. And that's alongside like name artists, And I just think that Judith would have been so jazzed by that. And I'm so, so happy that she is in this book. And that the mention of her activism in one of the areas being the environment. And I really think that Judith was ahead of the curve in a lot of ways within the literary scene in terms of the way she was talking about the environment before a lot of other people. And the poem in here is in keeping with that, and that's what I want to read. It's called The Continent of Plastic, and it's in her collection Of Fire or Water. And it has an epigram at the beginning, Turning and Turning in the Widening Gyre by W.B. Yeats. It swirls beneath the surface on ocean currents, massive vortex, new kind of wetland, bobbing and shifting on no fixed boundaries, rolling reflection of 1 billion million stars in the Milky Way, undulating, tide-woven flow, swirling and gleaming like Van Gogh's Starry Night. Toothbrushes, plastic bags, fishing nets, shoelace tips, water bottles, broken toys, condoms blasted to bits by sun and waves. This 8th entity kills inhabitants and visitors alike. Sea turtles mistake plastic produce bags for filmy jellyfish. Krill and plankton feeders suck it in. Seabirds gorge on fragments, plastic pearls looking like fish eggs, and regurgitate into the waiting mouths of hungry chicks. That's the poem. And it's in the section called Evidence. And I think you can see why it's there as evidence of hate. So thank you again to Judith for all that she is and all that she does, and that she's able to be a part of this. And thank you.
Although Michael and Hannah's perfect segue made it look like the official program is still happening, it's not true. The original program, the official program. Come on, I taught school for over 30 years. So what I said was, though Michael and Anna's perfect segue made it look like this is still part of the planned program, it's not true. And in fact, there is no more planned program. What we're suggesting is kind of a free-for-all. Anyone who would like to read or give a personal recollection is free to do so. We have no list, no organization, just come forward as the spirit strikes you. And there's also, of course, because it's Judith's party, wine, and plenty of food, and I think there's beer as well for the non-wine drinkers. But thank you all for coming in, really, it is just open now. Say what you want, eat what you want, drink what you want, have a party.
Sometime in this decade, Judith and I got into a large canoe. We put in the water on the Skagit River during a Skagit Poetry Fest. And it was the second time I'd been down the river. And after I read the poem about our trip down the river, I'll tell you what happened next. We were going to visit Fishtown. And during the 60s, 70s, it was one of those places where artists and poets and writers lived, sort of took over, hung out. And at that time, there was the Women of Seal Press in Seattle. There was Jim Bodine in Yakima, Red Sky Poetry, and some of us at Verner's in the University District. So this Robert Sons group was at Fishtown, where they got permission maybe to take over fish sheds on the Skagit River that had not been used by commercial or recreational or neighbor fishing. Fishtown, this is by Judith. Lower Skagit. An epigraph, from a long canoe with 18 paddlers. Language burned in us. We were wild with ideas. Bob Rose. Water rocks under us. Water pours over us from the slate sky. Water collects in the bottom of the boat, drips off our hat rims, soaks through our clothes. Purple larkspur shows vivid against rain-blackened rock faces. Columbine in niches cling in shallow soil. Saxifrage shines white on succulent stems. A red-tailed hawk drifts above, looking for lunch. We rock in the river current. Paddles ready, then all paddles ahead, and paddles rest. Shouted from the back of the boat. A mean wind arrives from the south. We are pilgrims searching the ghost of Fishtown hovering in the Skagit rain. But most shacks have been torn down. The land logged, leaving bare bones or nothing but green. The hopeful artists and scholars of the estuary scattered, mostly still around in the valley, still making art. All in our 60s and 70s now. Some have passed, a life lived for art, as ephemeral as a dance. But many leave a trail of poems and paintings behind. None can quite leave behind the life lived on the Skagit, the youthful hope and dedication. Shacks, landmarks, and channels gone, but rivers have memories, says Bob Rose. Restless, they adjust in their beds. Robert Sund is gone, but his tight little cabin is a refuge from today's rain. We huddle inside and crowd around the wood stove, drink hot tea, and listen to Tim McNulty read Sund's poems of this place. Water, water, herons, rain, swallows, mud, and rain again. Even a former resident of Fishtown can't find what was there. The river has changed channels, and Fishtown, a state of mind. So even though we're only supposed to be 5 or 6 people in Robert Sund's cabin, all 3 boatloads got in because it was so cold. But what happened next, and I was looking forward to this, was that we got in the boats and we were going to pass from the Skagit River to the saltwater to Laconnor. And the most wonderful thing is that in order to pass from the Skagit to the salt water, you have to go over a bar or a sand spit. So you line your canoe up and everybody starts yelling, paddle, because you have to paddle strong enough to leap over the bar. And when I die, as did Judith, I'm going to remember that moment, and Judith was in the boat with me. I'm going to pass from the Skagit freshwater to that sort of mythical old salt water. Thank you, and thank you, Judith.
I'm just going to say, I'm Shelley Nance. I'm a coach of Judith's son, Robin, Ski Hawks racing team, and mostly I know her from parties and Ski Hawks parties, and she was just always such a joy, and we did art projects, we ate a lot of food, we probably drank wine. She was always willing to help, and I'm thankful to be here and just see, I didn't know this whole side of her world, so I'm excited to discover more of what Judith was about. And we love Robin, he's awesome, and we have a great time, so thanks for being here.
I want to read a couple of Judith's poems. This first one was chosen by Anita Boyle, called Blueprint. Blue lines under skin, milk skin, trace a life support system that knows no reason, only flow and bring and take. A map that spells your life in complexities that weave the intercellular mesh, so fragile, a touch will crush, and capillaries bleed a bluish bruise under the surface. Your mother asks if I pray. What can I say to her? I don't know what to call this attention to detail I give. The traceries of vein and river I send to you and your mother. Our rivers of blood have their own reason. Your mother is asking for a miracle, and I ask with her. My voice, thick with not knowing, a road of sound and intention, heading toward the spaces between the stars.
Right. Wow.
And that was from Ghosts. And then here's a poem from her book, All Fire, All Water. And this is my choice. It's a villanelle. It's called The Bee Villanelle, with a quote from Emily Dickinson. To make a prairie, it takes a clover and one bee, one clover and a bee, and rebel bee. They were with us so long, heavy with gold-dusted bodies they go. We'll miss their sibilant song. Could it be that pesticides are all wrong? Their honey, their pollen, no one seems to know. They were with us so long. March to September, half said so long. US, Europe, Guatemala, Brazil, so silence descends on their sibilant song. They rise up and fly off in a mighty throng. Some even say a rapture in the meadow. They were with us so long. People are puzzled, worldwide strong. This year farm crops will cast a thin shadow. We'll miss their sibilant song. Has the great bee queen heard her evensong? In all climates, from sun to snow, they were with us so long. We miss their sibilant song.
Thank you again.
I'd like to read something that Judith wrote that it talks about her work with Diane DePrima. And about 5 years ago, I was the Northwest editor for the Malpais Review in New Mexico. And we were doing a feature on Diane DePrima. And I thought, I'm going to call Judd up and ask her to write something to add to this profile. And so this, I was thrilled that she wrote this, and I'm really honored to be here today to feel the energy and the warmth and share and remembering her spirit and her energy and her poetry. So this is by Judith. Diane DePrima's Hidden Religion. I had never seen such poems, the wild animal grace of them, the spiritual exploration of them, going back to the Paleolithic, beyond and forward, the sheer femaleness of them. It was 1974 when a lover gave me an early copy of Loba. I was transfixed, transformed, thrilled to my very being. In the middle of that time, the second wave of feminism, many were writing about our oppression, our anger, even the goddess in us all, and I was loving it. But Diane's Loba, wolf, woman and goddess, erotic and holy, source and destination, encompassed it all, and that was just the first part. She published an expanded version in '78. Loba is Inanna, Eleanor and Mary, Genevieve and Beatrice, Lilith and Kalima. She trails babies along dusty roads and is found OD'd in a methadone jail, scarfing the evidence. She rides a lion or maybe a horse wearing a red sari. She has a ring of fur around her ankles just over her bobby socks. She knows the flesh knows better than the spirit what the soul has eyes for. Later, the sheer glorious sweep of the project, the ambition of it was glorious. Diane's big class was hidden religions, and she was a rigorous teacher. She assigned almost impossible to find books, although many of us managed to find them. This is before Amazon, and there were no poetry texts that she noted, but explorations of the ancient, hidden, and known religion. The idea of New College was to study the thought that went into the poem, the poet's lore, not to tinker with the poem. I learned the oldest art on earth is cup holes carved in rock. It used to be assumed they were for holding oil, but now it emerges that they reflect the constellations. There are two major divisions of thought in religions. First, that life and nature is good, but unpredictable, nature religions. And second, that good only comes from outside, the heavens, and earth is not inherently good, sky-based religions. We went through the Grail legend, the Cathars, Tarot, Tantra. Through the flesh, we experienced the Godhead, the beloved alchemist, turning a base substance to a precious substance. It wasn't about lead and gold we came to understand. It was about the spiritual journey. We are reconstructing history from the other side, Diane said. I wouldn't be teaching it if I thought it were history. All of this source material for the poem. What I got was the poem, all of our work together is one poem with its separate parts. It's a spiritual journey, and what Diane gave us are necessary sources for the depth of the work. Diane served us a rich and heady mix. Her seeds fell on fertile ears, and I'm sure I was not the only one changed forever by working with her. And I think that those last two sentences also can reach out and apply to Judith as well. She served us a rich and heady mix, and her poems, her spirit, her soul, her generosity fell on fertile ears, and I'm sure we were not the only ones changed by working with her. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. That was really nice. One of the people that was changed by Judith was a friend and colleague of hers, Meg McCutcheon, who lives in Portland, but unfortunately was unable to come today. But she asked me to read a few words that she sent. For Judith, beloved mentor, colleague, and friend, your generosity led me to many portals. Some I stepped through, some we traveled together. Poetry, One Reel, Salmon Sisterhood, wedding blessings, elder gatherings in my new home. And then I gather that Meg McCutcheon picked up some of Judith's books and kind of randomly picked poems and just certain lines from the poems, and these are the ones that she sent. From Goddess of Red Sky. There was a certain moment when the goddess shared her words amid smoke, inviting, sexy, irresistible. silver threads of silken lines. What wisdom with the goddess of all fire, all water, hold and share with each of our small and large flames, honoring the going. And then other titles from Worker from the Old Country, from Ghosts. I never pray, he said, gazing at his missing fingernails. From Myrrh, My Life as a Screamer. It is, in any case, precious, a gift of transformative potential. And from Wisdom of the Body, from Wind, Hope, that charming mad woman with her flaming hair. And from All Fire, All Water, and she picked the poem Cranes, which is also the cover image, which I had the privilege of working with Judith to create that image. Lean and lovely they come, red-headed and hungry, stop and fuel for the long flight home. So that's from Meg McCutcheon, and I just want to say that many of you probably know that among our other skills, talents, and accomplishments, Judith was a universal life minister. And in fact, she married my wife, Karen, and I in our backyard with just a few friends there. And she was splendid in a green dress and a long scarf, as you can well picture Judith. And part of the ceremony she did was to read a poem. I won't read the whole poem here, but it is the poem Flowers from My Life as a Screamer. Just read the first part of the first line. When you ask them what they do for a living, they do not mention photosynthesis. Thank you.
Cool. David sort of provided a nice segue for me because I knew Judith when we lived in Seattle, and then we moved to Portland.
Go ahead and move the chair.
And she came and visited us for a writers' conference at the end of March last year. And then we heard what had happened, how sick she had become, and realized that we needed to drive up to Seattle to see our beloved friend one more time. And I wrote this poem for her. I'm mostly a prose writer, but I felt I needed to honor Judith by writing a poem. And I had the privilege, the honor to read this to her as she lay on her bed looking out on Lake Washington with her quilt over her. So this is called A Friend of Salmon, My Friend, for Judith Roche. A woman walks the world, hair the same hue as flesh of the fish she reveres and cherishes, making their way from distant rivers then to far-off oceans and back again to rivers to spawn, then die. Life following similar rhythms, patterns. Friend, advocate of these ancient fish, but not just of the oldest of old creatures, making their time-perfected journey. Poet, teacher, kind-hearted, generous woman, open to all who listen, who hear her words, understand her intentions, accept her love. And a friend to me when I was almost friendless in a cold, dark world, who opened her world to me with simple grace. My friend, your journey has been filled with warmth, with goodness, with love, enriching all you touched. My dear friend, whose journey will never end.
wonder if you know how perfect this is, because it's just like one of Judd's parties. People are milling around, drinking wine, talking to each other. Some people are reading poetry. I mean, this is exactly how it was. I want to thank Tari and Judith's family, Sahara, Gabby. When Sarah, my wife, who you just heard, and I moved to Seattle in 1994, I had asked one of my friends in San Francisco, does he know anybody in the Seattle writing community that I could get in touch with? And he wrote down Judith's name and phone number, and I kept it in my pocket. And after we had been here for a couple of weeks, I called, and it was the beginning of a really close friendship. I feel like I'm one of those ripples that Michael talked about after the stone goes into the water. So, Judith was, I was fortunate enough to read at Bumbershoot because of Judith, and a lot of things happened to me in my life that was all good because of Judith. So one of the things that writers do is share poems with each other, and what I want to do this afternoon is to read a poem of hers with an epigraph from one of my poems, which I thought was an act of great generosity on her part because it's who she was. So this is a poem from her book, Wisdom of the Body, and it's called September Shoes. Red shoes run faster with burnt sienna hair. Red wine tastes richer, a dark great date on the lip of crystal. Simple pleasures rise to the level of their own complexity. Red cars, sleeker, seeking the color of speed through vermilion temper, tantrums in the looped back miles of memory. Red leaves fall on a slate-colored pool, hold the nests of salmon clinging at shallow edges. Reds hold eggs with great round eyes, open for clues of the return road. Flames flickering in a fire dance. Red party dresses with flashing skirts. Inevitable, unexpected laughing in the cold crater of a silver moon. Red fox foraging in tall grass. The small mouse silently rowing her little boat through the long meadow. Nipples bleed red streaks in the milk. Garden rose bleeding on dry ground. Back to the wall. Thorns flashing like switchblades. Red ponies with dragging saddles, an a cappella song in the dusty aftermath of internal battles on the narrowing path. The smoked honey smell of autumn. Leaves turn wetly fallen on fermenting fruit. Where is the edge of orange or purple? And what does she suffer to bleach out or bruise that way in the dark matter stretching between stars? Thanks.
My name is Wendy Call, and I met Judith when she and I were both teachers in Writers in the Schools. And she and I also were teachers, not in the same classroom, but in the same program, here at Hugo House, well, the old Hugo House for many years, and also at Seattle University and at Pacific Lutheran University in Tacoma. And the month that she and I were both teaching a class that met every single day at PLU in Tacoma, we commuted together. So it was really an honor to have 2 hours every day for a month just to talk to Judith about poetry and about philosophy and all of the things that she knew about. And I learned a huge amount from her. So I'm going to read just the beginning of one of her poems from Myrrh, My Life is a Screamer. It's a poem I really love. It's one of those poems that her mother would not have been able to show to her friends because there's a lot of sex in it. So I'm just going to read the first section because that's the G-rated section and it's very upbeat. And before I read that, I wanted to read a short bit that is Judith's comment on this poem. I sort of formally interviewed Judith in 2016 for a writing project I was doing, and this is what she had to say about the petroglyph poem. There is a lot of wounding in this poem, but there is also a vibrant sexual love affair between the man and the protagonist. This is the wounding of modern life. I haven't looked at this poem for a long time. My Detroit is a Detroit that is long gone, and that is what makes the work valuable. And indeed, this work is enormously valuable. So this is part one of petroglyph poem from Myrrh, My Life is a Screamer. Blue clouds bleed mist, mountains in the distance, meaning rain to the east. A man stands in a doorway, post and lintel, the sun illuminates him. A woman with a halo of sun. Antelopes run carrying curved horns. The flow both ahead and behind. Staghorn figure in the middle of a spiked sun. Stars bloom around. A child stands on two legs, running between figures facing front on flat land. Circle signs in spokes. She is sun. A spider spins the story out despite shadow and cloud changing the light. High wind rising ryegrass. Whipped waters offshore. Sun is everywhere. Thank you.